welcome to Hope for the Caregiver. This is Peter Rosenberger. This is the program for you as a family caregiver, and I'm very glad to be with you today. Hope for the caregiver.com. Hopeforthecaregiver.com. Earlier this week, I had an article published of mine, and it was out at Blaze Media. The Blaze Media, you may have heard of this organization, and this article shares some of my thoughts in the aftermath of what happened with Charlie Kirk. I did not know him. I was not highly engaged in Turning Point USA. I have been watching quite a few of his videos, and I've been amazed by him for several years. I mean, the guy just was tremendous, just a force of nature. Actually, he was a force of supernature. That kind of clarity of thought and fearlessness to proclaim the gospel in such a way only comes from God. I was stunned by how many people he allowed to get to the microphone at his events and say the most horrific things to him. I mean, things you don't want to listen to in mixed company. I mean, you don't want to listen to it at all, but it's just horrific. And these people felt free to come and spew this stuff. And he sat there and took it and responded back to them. He didn't react, he responded. And it was astonishing, but I wrote an article about this because this is going to be it's appropriate that his organization was named Turning Point. This is a turning point for the country, and particularly for us as Christians. And the name of this article is Reckless Hate Cannot Win. Christ Has Already Broken It. That was not my original title. My original title was called Write Out and Meet Them, and they changed it. Editors do that, and I'm not sure totally why, but they do, which is normal, and that's fine. But I thought I would share it with you this morning. I'm going to do something I don't normally do, which is I'm going to read my article. I don't like to do that. As anybody that knows the behind the scenes of this program knows, we're never scripted on this program. I can't be scripted, period. I mean, I've had people just throw their hands up with me because it's just very difficult for me to follow a script. But in this particular case, I want to read this. Here's my article. Moments after announcing Charlie Kirk's death on Fox News' The Five, Dana Perino, who I've met, and she was very gracious to endorse Gracie's book. Wonderful lady, and she's normally very composed and unflappable. But she was fighting back tears. I don't know if you saw this or not. Her voice trembled as she pled for what she called a circuit breaker, something to break the rising current of fury now running through our culture. Her words were not political. They were profoundly human, and they named what many feel the world is burning too hot, and we're running out of ways to cool it down. Now, we've all sensed that current, and it hums beneath politics, families, neighborhoods, even churches. Rage lurks like a storm, waiting for the next spark. Dana wasn't just mourning a death. She was begging for relief from the relentless voltage of hate, but no human circuit breaker exists. History proves it. Every attempt to interrupt the current, revolutions, reforms, resolutions, eventually fails. We reset the breaker, and then the current surges again, because the overload isn't out there in the systems, it's in here, the human heart. It is the human condition. There is only one who has ever absorbed the full current of hatred and did not pass it on. And Jesus Christ didn't just diffuse the tension. He took the lightning bolt straight into himself. The cross was the great interruption where perfect love bore the full load of human rage and divine justice in one cataclysmic strike. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, saw it. As stones shattered his body, he gazed into heaven and declared he saw Jesus standing at the right hand of God. That proclamation, if you'll notice, didn't calm his killers. It enraged them. They picked up more rocks. Truth always incites the fury of hell. And we don't make Jesus Lord of our life. That may cause a few eyebrows to raise, but we don't make him Lord of our life. He already is Lord, whether we acknowledge him or not. And Scripture says that one day every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Philippians 2:10-11. Some will bow in gratitude. Others will be brought to their knees by the rod of iron. Revelations 19:15. But all will bow. which means this: hatred will not burn itself out. It will not abate. The closer Christ's light comes, the more ferociously darkness will fight it. Have you ever read Lord of the Rings? There was a king in there named King Theoden. And this is in the Two Towers. And they were being besieged at their fortress. And he voiced the dread that many feel. What can men do against such reckless hate? Aragorn's reply, Aragorn was the Christ figure in that, in the whole story of the Lord of the Rings. His reply was simple and defiant. Ride out and meet them. Charlie Kirk did just that. He rode out and met the storm head on. But greater still, Christ did that. He rode out from heaven into the teeth of our hatred and took the full charge of it upon himself. The cross was not retreat. It was the countercharge that broke the power of darkness forever. Centuries later, Martin Luther stood before the full weight of church and empire, knowing that they could kill him for refusing to recant. He said simply, "Here I stand. I can do no other. God help me." He wasn't fearless. He was anchored. And as the storm closed in around him, he gave the church its battle hymn. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. That's from A Mighty Fortress. And I've done that hymn on this series I do on this program of hymns that every Christian ought to know. That is one of the hymns that every Christian ought to know. And now you know a little bit more about that. Luther, he never believed that the hate would abate that I could see. I don't see any evidence that he believed the hate would abate. He simply knew that it could not win. And that is where we must stand as well. We don't stand with bravado. We stand with scars. We stand not by denying the darkness, but by fixing our eyes on the one who has already absorbed its full blast and still stands. He is the circuit breaker, but he's more. He doesn't only stop the current from destroying us, he rewires the entire system. What was corroded, he makes new. What was dead, he makes alive. He is not just the breaker, he is the pure current, the very life of God now flowing through those who belong to him. I have lived long enough to see what hate does when it is unleashed. It devours not just its targets, but its host. It corrodes from within, and it will not stop on its own. Hate is never satisfied. It must be interrupted. That interruption has already come. The current has already been broken, and the one who bore it all now reigns. And one day, so will we. We, like Aragorn of the Lord of the Rings, and more to the point, like Charlie Kirk of Turning Point, are only shadows of that great warrior, Christ, who rode out to meet the fury and shattered it at the cross. And our response to him is not with clenched fist, but with lifted eyes and steady voices. Lead on, O King Eternal. We follow not with fears, for gladness breaks like morning. Wherever thy face appears, thy cross is lifted over us. We journey in its light. The crown awaits the conquest. Lead on, O God of might. The hate will not abate. Charlie knew this, but God's truth abideth still, and our King rides before us. That's my article that's out at the Blaze right now. It's also on my website. You can go out to hopeforthecaregiver.com, and you'll see under mentions, and it'll be there as well if you want to share it. I would recommend it because Charlie's life has inspired me to be bolder. C.S. Lewis said, if Christianity is true, there is nothing else more important. Do we live like this? Does the world see us and think that we believe Christianity is the most important thing? They did when they saw Charlie Kirk. His last words were proclaiming the gospel. May we do the same. And that is hope for this caregiver. This is Peter Rosenberger. This is Hope for the Caregiver. We're going to be right back with a very special interview that I did with a lady. You're going to love listening to this woman's story. We'll be right back. back to Hope for the Caregiver. This is Peter Rosenberger. Glad to be with you. I am joined today by a wonderful lady I want to introduce to you. Her name is Carolyn Wheeler O'Byrne, and I love doing interviews like this, and I want to play some excerpts from my conversation with her. You can hear the entire interview at my podcast. Go out to the website or wherever you stream podcasts. You can play it through your Alexa device. You can play it through Apple. You can play it through wherever podcasts are streamed. It's there. And you can also go out to my Substack page, caregiver.substack.com, and you can subscribe to that. There's a free subscription, and then there's a paid subscription where we get all kinds of special things through that page. And I know a lot of this audience doesn't get out on social media, doesn't get out on computers and so forth. I know because you call me and write me letters. I've got a friend in Jackson, Mississippi. I've got another friend I talked to, Bruce, over in Ohio, and they don't get out and do those things. So I want to play these clips for that segment of the audience that doesn't get to do that, of these interviews that I have. And so this is my conversation with Carolyn Wheeler O'Byrne. Take us back to how all of this started, because you've had a rather dramatic journey. Take us back to the early days when you were there in Alabama and all of a sudden you found out something had happened with your daughter.
Yes. Well, we had a difficult pregnancy with her. She was the fourth child and about 17 months old. Finally, after begging doctors to help me figure out what was wrong with her, I had her to the doctor that morning, that day at lunch, and still that night deciding to take her on into the emergency room because I knew something was wrong. When I got to the emergency room, they said she's fine. And I knew she wasn't fine. And I was terrified to even put her to bed. So I just said, with all due respect, I'm staying until we figure this out. So we did.
What were the symptoms that caused you to press forward like this?
She had been a whiny child, but not in the spoiled rotten kind of way, in a different kind of whiny, on and off. She was happy sometimes, but then she would just get so frustrated and tired. That was one of her symptoms. Her legs were blue, not crayon blue, but blue, unusually blue. I pointed that out to the pediatrician, and she said, "Oh, that's just fat baby syndrome," because she was quite a chunk. But at this particular point, when it had gotten so bad, she had a cough that just sounded horrible. And you know, when you have that kind of cough where you just can't hardly take a breath between coughs, you just lose all breath. Well, it was that kind of cough. Well, one of her siblings had the crud and she was sick, and I totally see why the doctor would think, obviously, this one's got a fever and this one's sick and this one's got a cough, but it was just different, a different kind of cough.
And it was just basically mother's intuition at this point?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
And against the face of nobody else was agreeing with you.
nobody else saw what I was seeing. No one. So even though I did really have one other child that was sick, when you know your kids, when you've got four, maybe on your first one you feel a little unsure, but when you got four kids, you kind of know what's normal and what's not normal. I had been through fevers and sicknesses and scarlet fever and strep throat and flu and the pukes and you name it for years. So I knew what to expect on those types of things. But there was just something different. And when we got to the emergency room, that was quite an eventful evening. It was mid-May, and tornadoes and storms were everywhere. And I had never heard of code black, but I learned quickly what that was because the hospital was in code black, which means no one moves. The tornadoes were significant and you stay put where you are. So that's what was going on outside while I was inside trying to convince the medical team to dive deeper and let's find out what's wrong. So by the next morning, we were admitted into a room. Thankfully, code black had lifted, and the pediatric cardiologist came in to say, Daisy has congestive heart failure. Her ejection fraction is at 13%, and if she lives long enough, she's going to need a new heart. Well,
How old were you when this happened?
she was 17 months, so I was in my early 30s.
That is incredibly young age to hear that kind of news.
Yeah, I had zero experience with hospitalization. I was utterly in shock. What do you do when you have that? The only thing I could think of was at this time we were in the Huntsville hospital and we had lived in Nashville before, and I had connections at Vanderbilt. And the only thing I could think of was, we got to get to Vanderbilt. We got to get to Vanderbilt. So it took them a few days to get a switch going on.
And for those who are not in that area, Vanderbilt is a major teaching hospital with an outstanding children's hospital. You know, it's an amazing hospital. Gracie has had a lot of treatment there herself, and so I understand that rush there because that's a children's hospital, and that's where you have the latest and greatest there. And so I can understand you wanting to get there. That was not met with excitement from the folks that you were dealing with at the time, was it?
No, they really preferred me to stay there, but I insisted. We actually took her home for a couple of days. That we got out of the hospital on Friday and weren't scheduled to go into Vanderbilt until Monday. And I thought, I'm bringing home a little time bomb. What's going to happen in between these days? They did put her on some medication in those 2 days until we got to Vanderbilt. But that was a very scary thing in those 2 days to take her home. But we did go on to Vanderbilt Monday morning, and thankfully we had friends there that met me there and went to the doctor's office with me, and had other friends back home staying with the other kids. But it was kind of like a doctor visit, an office visit. It wasn't even admitted. And the doctor said, well, if she had this symptom and this symptom and this symptom. And I said, she has those symptoms. Every single thing you're saying, she has. So they decided to admit her that day. And wow, what a journey from there. It was things
Well,
unimaginable.
now they started to admit her, but they really weren't bought into the fact that there's something going on with her yet. Is
Well,
that
I don't.
is that a fair assessment?
Maybe so. Maybe they didn't see how utterly tragic we were in the situation. I don't know what Huntsville had talked to them about, but when they finally did the testing, they were like, oh, yeah, this is very serious. But I kind of felt like they didn't see the seriousness of it at the beginning. But we did get in the hospital that very day. So that's what I knew needed to happen. And pretty soon, within one day, they started taking action on things. They did a catheterization through her groin. That was a moment that I just about lost all sanity of them taking her from me to do that, because I felt like maybe I wouldn't even see her again after that moment. They decided that from that heart catheterization, it wasn't really her heart that was the problem. What had happened was, since her beginning of life, her immune system had somehow decided that her heart was the enemy. So it had been trying to get rid of her heart the whole time. Because of that, her circulatory system was extremely underdeveloped, which is why one of the reasons why her legs were blue, one of the reasons why she got tired and frustrated and didn't feel well. She just wanted to play in her little first walking self, wanted to get up and play and run with the other kids, but she just couldn't. So when they tried to get an IV, nothing worked. They literally tried from head to toe, had her strapped down, screaming bloody murder, trying to get an IV, and they couldn't. Then they decided to try a PICC line in one of her arms. That failed. They tried a PICC line in the other arm. That failed. So they put her in ICU and put in a central line in her chest. And that was their, as you know very well, that was their access line. So they decided to give
By the
her.
way, by the way, I tell them with Gracie when they're trying to get lines and so forth, and they come in and stick, and sometimes they tend to be a little bit cavalier. Oh no, we don't. And I look at them. I say, we start charging after the second attempt, and because she's hard to get a good stick on,
Yeah.
and I want them to know. And a lot of times, I will call for the head sticker. I have found sometimes you have to go up the food chain to get somebody who is a little bit more experienced in this, because not everybody can get a good stick, and clearly that was the case. But going to a central line on a little baby that's a big step.
Yeah, it was. So they decided to try an experimental medicine to see if that would stop her immune system completely, pretty much shock and kill her immune system, and restart it. And it was a 14-day process. And in the first couple of days, I noticed these little tiny red dots on her body. And I called in the doctor, and she said, that's just contact dermatitis. And I thought, okay. So several hours later, I called her back in and I said, there's many, many, many more. She said, that's just contact dermatitis. So by that night, Daisy started screaming and her red dots started connecting. And she screamed for 6.5 hours before she finally stopped from excruciating pain and exhaustion. And she just laid in my lap silently. And if I moved, she would scream. And I called the nurse and I said, she's burning up. I need you to come check. And her temperature was 106.8. So they were
Oh my.
scurrying to find cooling blankets, and we're having a hard time with that.
You're listening to my interview with Carolyn Wheeler O'Byrne. You can hear the entire interview on my podcast, and you can stream that wherever you stream podcasts. And you can certainly find it at the website, hopeforthecaregiver.com, or at my Substack page, caregiver.substack.com. We're going to come back and hear more of her story and the amazing things that God has done in her life and through her life, even through these very difficult things. This is Peter Rosenberger. This is Hope for the Caregiver, hopeforthecaregiver.com. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hope for the Caregiver. This is Peter Rosenberger. Glad to be with you. We're continuing on with my interview with Carolyn Wheeler O'Byrne. And she's just a remarkable woman from Northwest Alabama. And let's get back to the conversation. Again, you can hear the entire thing on my Substack page, caregiver.substack.com, or at the podcast, wherever you stream podcasts, it's out there, or you can go to hopeforthecaregiver.com. Let's get back to the interview.
They decided to take her off that medicine because it was obviously causing major problems. So she stayed in that silent state for 3 days if I didn't move, if I held her. So I held her for 3 solid days, getting up about once a day to go to the bathroom. Because when I stirred or switched sides, where you got to get a little bit comfortable from one side to the other, she would scream. That chemical had fried her from the inside out, and all of a sudden her skin started falling off. People thought she was a burn victim, and she looked like a little cherub. If you can imagine the perfect picture in your mind of this chunky baby with blonde curly hair, well, that's exactly what she looked like. And in the process of her skin falling off, as it started drying, it was about as thick as a thin t-shirt coming off. And I literally had to pull her scalp off through the ends of her curly little hair because it was so thick. So that was quite
Now,
a
this is
horrific.
how long are you into this at this point? How many days?
Well, 3 days of just laying there silently, unless I moved. Um, about 4 or 5 days, she could start getting up and walk around. And then her skin was solid 100% red. And then it just started, it dried pretty quick, surprisingly. As it dried a little bit, that's when it started coming off. At this point, they were just doing tons of neurological testing to see what it did to her. They were doing liver testing. They were testing the rest of her body, one test after the other, to see what damage this chemical had done. It was an unimaginable thing that some of it I just don't even remember until I start telling the story because of the shock that I went through and
Some of
imagining.
it is worthy of forgetting.
Yes, many times they had to put her in a straitjacket, and that was absolutely horrible to stand there and watch her. Thankfully, I was kind yet adamant enough that almost every single time she went into something, even the PIC line, they let me go in. Excuse me. So I was there. I did not want her to be anywhere that I wasn't there so that I could, and they did learn that I didn't get in their way, but I would stay at her head and kiss her and rub her head and talk to her to actually try to help her cope, but try to help them be able to do whatever they needed to do. So I'm grateful for that. I'm not saying that's what they're going to allow you to do these days. I don't know, but I'm very grateful for.
Oh, I have I've kind of bullied my way into those places, and sometimes you have to do that. I'm sorry to say it, but you do. And had you not, she wouldn't have made it.
Possibly not. I agree with that.
It does. And there's been times with Gracie, had I not been there and done what I did, that she wouldn't be alive today. And that's the nature. And I bet you, if I took a poll of everybody listening to this program that are any kind of caregiver for any length of time, we all have similar stories. Had we not been there, and so it took an enormous amount of assertiveness. I mean, I hate to say the cliche, but that mama bear in you kind of came out. I mean, you're not a mean person, and you don't go in there and start throwing elbows, but you have to be assertive, and it's a little bit unnerving. But what's the consequence if you don't?
You have to
And
stand your ground. You've
you
got a
do.
gut feeling, and you've got to
And
go
I
with
mean, you
that
got a
gut feeling.
soft-spoken voice. I mean, you're a nice lady, a soft-spoken voice. You Southern gal, you've got all that and that. But in moments like that, that has to be put on the shelf, and you turn into a warrior at that point. I've got a reputation of being a jerk, but you don't. I do, but you don't, and so they know when I say something, and I'm a guy too, and the system tends to be a little bit more misogynistic. I mean, have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, but I feel like,
I mean, even Gracie says that to me all the time. She says, "Look, I want to fight this battle, but I'm a woman and they're not going to listen to me," and which
yeah,
is a terrible indictment. I'm just calling balls and strikes. That's what it is. We've all seen it before. For many caregivers, it's very difficult to be this assertive, but you were left with no choice. You had to be there. Something is wrong. Her fever is 106. What's going on? She's got these splotches. This is not contact irritation here. This is no, there's something else going on. And you may not know the science, but you know your daughter.
right.
And that's what I call caregiver authority. And you wielded it, and she's alive now. Now this has gone into now days, and now we're into weeks.
We're into weeks, yes.
All right. Then
So
what happened?
she started recovering from that. She was able to get to go to the playroom, which she loved to do, and I felt like, okay, we're out of that. We're gonna be okay. And then all of a sudden, she started throwing up. So I called the nurse in and I said, she's throwing up. She feels warm. What's going on? And so they did some testing, and it just happened to be that the baby next door had MRSA. So guess what? We had MRSA. The central line was the line that had gotten infected. So she went straight into ICU and they put her under. And that was the moment that I didn't realize, because the first time they put her in ICU, it was just for the day. So I didn't lose my room. But I had no idea. I was clueless that when my child went in ICU, they were going to not allow me to stay in that room anymore. I didn't know that. So I had weeks of my things, her things, no vehicle. I had been dropped off because my van was needed for the kids at home. I wasn't leaving her anyway, so I wasn't really concerned about being there with no transportation until I figured out that I had no place to go. So thankfully, that day, a friend of mine who worked there found a cart and let me pile everything high on that cart and leave it in her office until I had arrangements. And an older couple that had been friends of ours that lives in Nashville. They've passed away since. They had an old 80s conversion van. Do you remember in the 80s when everybody had a conversion van?
It,
They
it it seemed like it.
Yes, they had theirs still.
I think it was
And
the effect of the A Team.
yeah.
That van that B.A. Baracus drove around, but that's dating me quite a bit.
I remember I loved that show. But they brought their van and parked it in the parking lot, and that became my home. And Daisy was in ICU for over a week. They would come get my clothes once a week and wash them and bring me some snacks. And I would stay in the ICU literally all day long. They really weren't crazy about you being in there. There wasn't a bathroom available. You couldn't eat in there. There was one chair, if I remember correctly. I remember standing a lot. And about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, when I was about ready to pass out, I would walk out to the scary Nashville Vanderbilt parking lot and lock myself in that van and lay down and crash for a few hours. Of course, eat a snack before I lay down, eat a snack, bring a snack in my purse, because that's where my snacks were, because I wasn't allowed to eat in the ICU room. And then go back in first thing in the morning, just enough time to have the rest to just make it through the day. And what I forgot to say, when she was going through the experimental medication, they knew that she was going to have a blood transfusion through this process, but didn't tell me about it. So when I found out she needed to have a blood transfusion, I said, wait, I want her to have my blood if at all possible. Yes, I'm grateful for strangers' blood. I don't have a problem with that. But if she can have mine, wouldn't that be better? So they weren't too happy about it, but they stopped the process long enough for me to go to the blood bank, give blood, and within a few hours, they found out that my blood was just trashed. I had so not taken care of me that my blood was not in good enough shape to help her, which
Mm.
is one of the things that I strongly, strongly speak about is caregivers. You have to take care of you or you cannot take care of them.
I've been saying that very thing for as long as I've been doing this program, and I've been preaching that message, but I don't think I've ever had it driven home in quite the same way, is that your blood actually suffered the consequences and you couldn't even donate blood to your daughter. I cannot tell you how many times that phrase has been uttered about taking care of yourself, and we all say that. But you bring this home to a much different level when you say your blood was trashed. That had to have been a big gut punch in a series of gut punches that you were having.
Yeah, I was devastated because, again, I was very grateful for Stranger's Blood, and that's what she ended up needing to get. But had she been able to have mine, what could be better than your own parents' blood if it's a good match? To me, I don't think anything could be better. But I was very, very saddened by that, but couldn't do anything about it. So, fast forward back to ICU. She was just laying there, lifeless. And I felt like this was probably the last time I was going to see her. So that's why I spent every single moment in there that I possibly could. I wouldn't even have gone to lay down if I knew that if I didn't, I wasn't going to make it through the next day. But surviving on very little sleep and snacks.
We're going to have to stop here. I hope you're enjoying this conversation with Carolyn O'Byrne, talking about Daisy's Place. We're going to have more of this next week, but there was just so much to fit on this program. But I wanted you to be introduced to her and hear her amazing story. We got more to go. Next week, you'll hear the rest of it. You could always hear it right now on demand through my podcast, which is available wherever you stream podcasts, and my Substack page, caregiver.substack.com. We'll be right back with our hymn of the week that every caregiver ought to know. This is Peter Rosenberger. This is Hope for the Caregiver. Welcome back to Hope for the Caregiver. This is Peter Rosenberger. Very glad to have you back. And we're continuing on our series of hymns that every caregiver ought to know. Today, based on what we just heard from Carolyn and Daisy's Place, I thought this hymn might be appropriate. It was written back in the 1700s by a pastor named John Fawcett. Not like F-A-U-C-E-T, which is your water faucet. It's F-A-W-C-E-T. He served a tiny, poor church in rural England. And after several years, he was invited to a much larger and wealthier church in London, and he accepted the offer. But when he and his wife, they packed up their belongings and they were saying goodbye, the people of this little church gathered around them weeping. They had been through so much life together, and their love was deep. And he looked at his wife, and they both knew they couldn't leave. They couldn't leave. They unpacked the wagon, not the station wagon, just the wagon, and he served that little flock for the rest of his life. And out of that moment, he wrote this hymn, and it was a song about the kind of love that binds hearts together. And it's the kind of love that we as caregivers know all too well. And let's go to the caregiver keyboard. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. You know this one. The fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. Now, here's what I want to tell you about on this song. We cover several doctrinal things in this. And a lot of people were talking about this thing with Charlie Kirk and how it affected them so deeply. And yes, it's an incredibly painful thing to watch this. And I cannot imagine the horror that his wife and his family and all are dealing with. These children got to grow up without a father. And people are saying, I didn't even know him. Why is this hurting so much? And I say to you what someone said to me. There's a doctrine in the church called the doctrine of the communion of saints. And because we are in Christ, we are never separated. In that sense, we're always connected, and it's part of us. We hurt when one another hurts. We share our mutual woe. Our mutual burdens bear. That's why we feel it. That's why when you're listening to Carolyn talk about Daisy's Place, we're feeling that. We see this is a woman who's sleeping in a van in the parking lot of the hospital because there's no place for her to sleep. She doesn't have anything. And we're hurting with her because she's our sister. And often for each other flows the sympathizing tear. And that's why this song is such a special song. From sorrow, toil, and pain, and sin, we shall be free. and perfect love and friendship reign through all eternity. How many of you all have sung this at your church at the end of a meeting or a special dinner or whatever, and just sung this little hymn, and now you know the story because this pastor wrote this. He couldn't say goodbye to these people. And he turned down a career, mobility, a career upward mobility to go to a big church in London, and he unpacked the wagon, and he stayed with these people he was called to pastor, and he wrote one of the most endearing hymns of the entire church. We sing this all the time. I grew up singing this. Sometimes we didn't know what else to sing. There were two songs that we would sing at gatherings when we didn't really know what else to sing because people didn't know the lyrics or they whatever. We didn't have the hymn books. And I remember Dad did this a lot at church, and he would lead us in either the doxology, praise God from whom all blessings flow, which we've covered as one of the hymns that every caregiver ought to know, and this one. How many fellowship hall dinners have you been connected with and they sang this hymn? Our hearts in Christian love. It's just a little, it's only like 2 sentences. The fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above, is like to that above. So, as a caregiver, when we sing this song, blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, this connects us to the church universal. It's sometimes called the Catholic Church, the Holy Catholic Church, not the Roman Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, Church Universal, the invisible church. So as you go about your day as a caregiver, doing things that you feel like you're doing in obscurity or isolation, nobody's seeing it. Yeah, there are people seeing it. You can't necessarily see them, but we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And we're all connected because of Christ. It's called the communion of the saints. And we are all connected to the church universal, the invisible church. We may not see the visible church. That's when you go to local church bodies and so forth. That's the visible church. But there is the invisible church. And that's what connects us all, no matter what's going on that you see in your visible church. You could have churches going through all kinds of conflict or whatever else, but the invisible church, my mother told me this years ago, the organization of the church is in pretty rough shape right now. But the organism of the body of Christ is doing just fine. Is doing just fine. And that's what we're a part of. That's what we're talking about right here. This little hymn that John Fawcett wrote back in the 1700s. This glorious hope revives our courage by the way, while each in expectation lives and waits to see the day. There's 6 verses to this. We only know the first one usually. When we are called to part, it gives us inward pain, but we shall still be joined in heart and hope to meet again. Before our Father's throne, we pour our ardent prayers. Our fears, our hopes, our aims are one, our comforts and our cares. Our fears, our hopes, our aims are one. Our comforts and our cares. It's all part of this. You are not doing this in a vacuum. If you belong to Christ, you are not doing this in a vacuum. You are part of the great church invisible. And there are saints cheering you on. It says that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Do you know what a walk-off home run is? A walk-off home run is a home run that is hit by the home team in the bottom of the final inning that instantly wins the game. Now, here's why it's called that. As soon as the batter hits it and the winning run scores, the game is over on the spot. The players can literally walk off the field because no more play is needed. The score is tied in the bottom of the ninth, and this guy gets up, hits his home run, knocks it out of the park. He still has to walk the bases, so he jogs along. Everybody's cheering, and the whole team is waiting for him at home plate to welcome him in, and he jumps on the plate and wins the game. And there's a guy that collects pictures of all of these, as many as he can. He's got a whole collection of pictures of walk-off home runs, and it shows the batter running around third and heading into home, and the whole team is out there behind home plate waving and cheering and waiting for him to hit home plate. And he said the reason he collects that is because he said that's a picture of our Christian walk as we are all heading towards home, where we don't have to ever say goodbye. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. The fellowship of kindred minds is like to that above. Isn't that a great hymn? That's a great hymn that we as believers should know. We as caregivers should know. So the next time you feel like nobody is seeing anything you're doing, understand that you're hitting a walk-off home run. And there's a whole team of people cheering for you. Blessed be the tie that binds. I hope you are enjoying this series about the hymns. I love the hymns. You know I do. And I love playing them for you. I love doing this for you. And it ministers to me. I'm doing this for myself. I'm preaching to myself because I got to hear from somebody with my level of experience. And there's nobody else that has a radio show that has my level of experience. I have to listen to my own show. Just like David did at Ziklag. He ministered to himself. He encouraged himself in the Lord. That's what I'm doing, and I thank you for letting me do this and spend time with you to do that. If you like what you're hearing, go out to the website, hopeforthecaregiver.com. Donate buttons right there. Help us do more. Anyone that donates $100 or more over the next week or so, you know what? I'll send you a signed copy of my new book. It's called A Caregiver's Companion, just as a thank you. And I appreciate it very much. We love what we get to do here, and we appreciate the opportunity to do it with you. hopeforthecaregiver.com. This is Peter Rosenberger. This is the program for you as a family caregiver, and we do this because healthy caregivers make better caregivers. Remember this week. Blessed be the tie that binds, and I'm glad that we have that tie that binds us all together. Never forget that healthy caregivers make better caregivers, and today's a great day to start being healthy. This is Peter Rosenberger, Hope for the Caregiver, hopeforthecaregiver.com. We'll see you next